everybody, it's Greg Gutfeld. This is The One. We have a repeat offender on the show today. One of my favorite brains on the planet. His name's Gad Saad. He would make a great Wheel of Fortune puzzle because his name is Gad, G-A-D, and Saad, S-A-A-D. So you'd have to buy the vowel A, and then you'd win. He's a evolutionary behavioral scientist at the John Molson School of Business. And he's known for applying evolutionary psychology to marketing and consumer behavior. You think that's not exciting? You're wrong. I read his book, The Consuming Instinct, and I learned so much crazy crap about how humans make consumer choices. It's kind of freaky, and I suggest you read that book. He's been profiled all over the place. He's appeared on tons of podcasts. But I'm going to talk to him about what happened in the last month or so. But first I want to say, Professor Saad, how are you?
Very well. I should just warn you that I'm doing this chat hiding under the table because I'm afraid that Judge Kavanaugh's death squads might be rounding us up. Yeah. So I hope they still hear me despite the fact that I'm hiding under the table.
Yeah. See, I'm short. I don't even have to hide. I just walk right under a table, and I don't even mess up my hair. I want to remind my listeners that, like Scott Adams, you were one of the 4 or 5 people who suggested that Trump would win. I don't know if you predicted that Trump would win, but you said that there was a probability that he would, and your reasoning. I want to just remind people that why you thought that Trump was going to win.
So I basically argue that there are many different decision rules that we can use when we're making a choice. Mm-hmm. And one such rule, called the Lexicographic rule, basically works as follows. You simply look at your most important attribute. So, for example, if you're choosing between cars and gas efficiency is the most important attribute for you, then you will simply choose that car which scores the best on your most important attribute. So viewed from that perspective, if, for example, you're someone who cared strictly about immigration policy, then you might use the lexicographic rule and arrive, rightly or wrongly, to the conclusion that since Trump scores higher on that attribute than Hillary Clinton, you choose her. And the reason why I was arguing this is because I was pushing back against the idea, including that was espoused by many of my supposedly intelligent friends, that only racist hicks who are toothless and sleep with their sisters would vote for Trump, and yet there are very clear ways by which very reasonable people could have chosen Trump.
Exactly. So that was, it was a very, it was an incredibly coherent, persuasive argument, and I always remember that from almost over 2 years ago. So now, 2 years in, what is your assessment of what Trump has been doing, how he's been faring, and so on?
Well, I think that he's been doing quite well. Obviously, if we look at superficial cues, yes, he's a bit of an ogre in the manner by which he, his elocution, his style, and I think that's the problem with a lot of my highfalutin, ivory tower friends, right? They respond to what I call an aesthetic injury, right?
Yeah.
They are disgusted by his mannerisms, by his style, by his elocution. On the other hand, if you compare him to Barack Obama, he was the exact opposite on those aesthetic cues, right? He's tall, he speaks with a nice voice, he smiles, he's well-spoken, he's a good orator. But of course, we know in marketing that there are 2 ways by which people could be persuaded. They could be persuaded through peripheral cues, meaning sort of inconsequential cues, or substantive cues. And I truly think that much of the visceral hate of Trump stems from people's peripheral disdain of his style. Yeah. But I think on the substantive matters, I think he's doing okay.
I want to bring up a similar story just from my own personal my background. I remember I had a doctor who was very charming, closer to my age, and he was young, good-looking guy, and he misdiagnosed something that I had, and it got worse. I went to a different doctor who was, he was just an a-hole, just a terrible bedside manner. And he just immediately diagnosed it like that. And it was like I learned there, it's like, you know what? I'd rather take a competent jerk over an incompetent, charming person. Because a charming person, that's almost like an evolutionary design. Like, if you're not very good at something, it's better that you're charming, right? Maybe.
Exactly right. I mean, it's if you'd like, it's a manifestation of the general phenomenon of packaging matters, right?
Yeah.
If you take the exact same product and either put it in a fancy package or in a less fancy package, objectively speaking, your experience of the product should be the same. It's the same product, and yet we attribute higher quality perception to the exact same product if it is placed in a fancier package. And that's the difference between Trump and, say, Obama. Trump is a very ugly package. Obama is a very beautiful package. Ergo, Obama is great. Trump is bad, but only idiots think that way.
Yeah. So now I want to move into the more contemporary stuff. You brought up the Kavanaugh scandal, affair, whatever. And you and I both love Jordan Peterson. I know that you know him, and I've had him on this podcast on my show. He's a great guy. But you actually came out and were critical of him because of something that he had suggested, I believe, on Twitter, regarding what Brett Kavanaugh should do if he ends up becoming confirmed. And Jordan Peterson suggested that he resign, and you responded like, "Are you nuts?"
Well, I mean, it just struck me as baffling, not only because, on first principles, it's an insane position to take, but the irony here is that Jordan Peterson has himself been the victim of the lynch mob, right? I mean, he's a Nazi, and so on. And so as someone who has been at the forefront of knowing the destructive, tsunami that could come your way, that he would actually acquiesce to the mob by saying, hey, let's all get along, why shouldn't he step down, was insane.
Yeah, it made no sense to me. And I felt like my first instinct was that, okay, Canadians are just nice people, and so he thought, like, Peterson's thinking, oh, if you do this gentle gesture to the left, it will result in a group hug. That's a complete misreading of how America works.
Exactly. Well, I mean, look, why should, by that logic, Trump, when he won, he should have stepped down as an appeasement measure, right? I mean, he should be nice to Hillary so that we can have unison, and he should have stepped down. I mean, it's baffling. I mean, he's tried to walk it back now, but I think the damage is done. Look, if you're not sure of a position, don't tweet it. And one of the things that really upsets me is I get a lot of comments from people saying, well, what kind of friend are you to openly criticize him? And I am a true friend.
Yes.
I am the type of friend who will criticize you if you say something that I consider to be idiotic.
Yeah, no, that's important. When you mentioned the word mob, I don't know if you watch a lot of American cable TV, but you're on CNN right now. They've adopted this tact where anytime you bring up the word mob to describe an angry group of people, it is considered almost like an intolerable smear. Twice in the last 2 days, they have yelled at people for using the M word. It's like, you cannot call them a mob. They're protesters. And this is I find this now frightening to me, that we're now like recasting what we used to think is undemocratic, almost like a Stalinistic practice, as something that's totally acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the mob behavior is insane, but I think what you're talking about speaks to a cancer that started spreading originally on university campuses. So a strain of postmodernism is something called deconstructivism, or deconstructionism, which is basically the idea that language creates reality. There is no sort of objective reality. It's whatever we name something that ultimately shapes our reality. And this is why it is so important for these intellectual terrorists to then constantly rename things, because by renaming things, we alter our reality. So this is why we shouldn't call something a mob but protesters. This is why they're not terrorists but they're freedom fighters. And so on and so forth. It's an endless linguistic game that leads us only to the abyss of lunacy. Yeah,
and and to go back a little bit on Peterson and just humanity in general. At some point, the mob will come for you. I mean, you made the joke at the start like you were hiding under the table, but that's not really a joke, because because we are so terrified of sharing the risk. Like you're an exception. you're willing to share the risk in facing the mob. You look at people like Trump and Kanye West. These are types that are willing to suffer the slings and arrows, knowing like they're rich enough and powerful enough that it won't. That they can still go to an island and live a nice life. But most people can't. Like if you're working in human resources in a company, you're not going to share the risk. So when the mob comes for, an employee or comes for you, you just have to bend. That's the frightening part, I think.
Well, there's something called the tragedy of the commons, if I can just take a minute or two to explain it. So, for example, if you've got 10 farmers, each of whom is using his livestock to graze the land, but then the land really needs a year or two to recover so that everybody should stop grazing. So they come to some gentlemanly agreement where all 10 farmers say, hey, none of us will use this patch of land for grazing of our livestock. And they shake hands.
Right.
But then each one thinks, if I renege on the contract and I cheat, but all other 9 folks will be honorable, that's the ideal situation because the land can still recover and at least I've gotten my livestock to graze. Well, of course, the tragedy of the commons is that every single one of them thinks like this, and therefore the collusion, if you'd like, is broken. Well, this is exactly what happens with diffusion of responsibility. Let Gad Saad worry about fighting the big fight. I'll keep quiet, and hopefully he will solve it for me.
Right.
And this is what's wrong. Not everybody has the same platform. Not everybody has the same voice. But everybody has some voice to get engaged. And as long as people don't feel the personal responsibility to get engaged, we will continue to lose the battle of ideas.
This is, to me, this is such an epiphany, but obviously this is something that has been around forever. But I think about it all the time. It is kind of like the same logic why you would have a vaccine. Like some people won't take the vaccine because everybody else takes the vaccine, so they don't have to. Is that kind of the same, maybe? Yeah.
Well, speaking, by the way, of vaccines, if you forgive a shameless plug, in my next book, I talk about how do you inoculate yourself? How do you vaccinate yourself against bad ideas? And so I call these idea pathogens. And so a lot of the lunacy that we're currently seeing started in the ecosystem of the university: postmodernism, cultural relativism, radical feminism, biophobia, fear of biology. And so what I basically do in the book is I trace the start of patient zero, if you'd like, how the virus spreads, and what we can do to inoculate ourselves against this stupidity.
When does this book come out, by the way?
Probably early 2020.
Wow. Okay, so I got to wait a year.
You got to wait a year.
I got to wait a year. I think this is such an important topic. Yesterday or 2 days ago, I was on Twitter, and I saw these 2 examples of what I would call the social media mob, and Scott Kelly. This guy's an astronaut. He goes into space. Space scares me. This guy apologized for quoting Winston Churchill. He was so scared of a tiny mob that and then in the same day, a CNN reporter had to apologize, I can't remember her name, for a couple of tweets that she did in college in which they were considered homophobic, and so she had to apologize. They were both examples of people getting mobbed and being forced to apologize. And I'm looking at this. Caitlin Collins was the name of the reporter. And I defended both of these people, Caitlin Collins, and I was more disgusted by Scott Kelly for his apology. But do you think anybody would do that for you or me? Like if you were in the position of something in your past that comes up, do you feel confident that there would be a complete stranger, maybe on the other side of the political divide? I did this for, I think, a guy named Sam Cedar, I think was his name. But I defend people on the other side, but I don't think they will share the risk, will they?
They won't. And by the way, it's so funny that you mentioned Scott Kelly, because I just did yesterday a clip on my channel on him, and the title of my clip was called "Honey Badger versus Astronaut: Courage versus Cowardice." Because my point here, and actually I was just writing that section in my forthcoming book. Basically, I was arguing, get in touch with your inner honey badger, right? Your honey badger will go up against lions, and the lions will retreat.
Right.
So if you're coming from a position of principles where you truly believe in those principles, you should never back down, which brings us back to Jordan Peterson, which, I can understand how he would take such a weak position regarding Kavanaugh, because I've given many examples from my own personal life where I was attacked, and I just went so viciously on the offensive that the attackers ended up going away. I mean, it's the old, when you and I were kids and you had a bully, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I was 11 years old and I came from Canada, I remember there were 3 bullies. Now, I just gone through the Civil War, so it wasn't going to be another 11-year-old who was going to intimidate me. I was running for my life in Lebanon. And so there was this one kid who used to pretend that he was Fonzie from Happy Days,
right.
who was going around the bus, bullying everybody. Well, accidentally, his face ended up hitting one of the metal things, and I don't mean that accidentally,
Yes.
and suddenly he never bothered anybody.
Yeah.
Well, now, I don't condone violence, but I do support the idea that you stand up to bullies. Regrettably, too few people have the, if you like, the ideological fortitude to stand their ground. The second that the tsunami comes at you, they retreat, and that's what happened to the castrated astronaut.
Well, it's to your point. There are 2 points here. I think the big mistake that corporations, media, politicians make is that they mistake a small vocal cabal for something larger and dangerous. So let's say it's like 3 people on Twitter, but the 3 people on Twitter create the feeling of 300,000 or 30,000. And so what happens is the corporation, the company, whomever, they actually grant them that power through their own reticence or cowardice. And the reason for that, and this is why people like me are vulnerable, is that the horde, this small group, they don't just target you. They target your career. They go after advertisers. So what happens is you are totally innocent, and people will understand that you're innocent, but they won't help you because they don't want to be targeted. It's the crocodile eats you last, metaphor.
Exactly. I'll tell you actually just a recent example that happened to me in terms of targeted occupational harassment. So about a month ago, you might remember when Serena Williams, went completely wacko during the final, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I decided to weigh in and sort of, criticize her, truly execrable behavior. Well, as you might expect, many people started attacking me. I'm sexist, I'm racist, because, you're not allowed to criticize a person if they are black and if they are a woman. I mean, that's just untouchable. Well, okay, that's all fine, and I expected that. But one woman, a white woman nonetheless, decided that my criticizing Serena Williams was so egregious that I should lose my job.
Right.
And so she started tagging my university. Well, guess what I did? I went on the offensive. She got so scared, she closed down her Twitter account. The next day, she opens up another Twitter account and asks me to remove all of her tweets and my responses to them. When I refuse to do that, she threatens to sue me for defamation. So, I mean, imagine how cancerous this person must be. She attacks you and tries to end your career. When that fails, she's the victim.
Yeah. No, it's it's a strange time, and I think I'm hoping. I try not to overblow this kind of thing, but when you look at Donald Trump and you look at I would say the most recent example of Kanye West, why they're so consequential is that they're willing to share the risk because they have so much capital to expend. It's like Kanye West is not going to go broke. His career's not going to end. But he's risking his audience. He's risking his audience, definitely. And he has TMZ constantly coming after him. He has the left that thought he was a hero who now can't make heads or tails. Trump doesn't care. He's a billionaire. So they can share this risk. And if everybody took that as an example to share the risk, this stuff would go away. I mean, there are people like you. There's Dave Rubin. There's Sam Harris. There's Scott Adams. These are influential people who are willing to say, online or in social media, certain things that they could get targeted for, but they're willing to share the risk. And I think that's the only way to move forward in this world is that people, if we create a movement, that is about share. I think that's the, when they talk about the internet, the dark web or whatever,
right.
They don't really know what it is. I don't think they know. It's about people with different ideas coming together and respecting their ideas. I think that's what it is. But actually, the movement should be about sharing the risk, that everybody has to stand up and say, okay, if you come after me, I'm going to fight. And if you go after him, I'm going to fight. And if you go after her, I'm going to fight. I think that's like the only answer. I don't know.
And incidentally, by the way, I mean, if you forgive me, not to toot my own horn, but one of the things that I do on my show is that I serve as a central repository for endless maligned academics. I mean, Jordan Peterson had originally reached out to me 2 years ago before anybody had heard of him. He was a fan of mine. He knew of my show, tried to come on my show because of the gender pronoun stuff that he was facing. Nobody would talk to him, and I said, of course, come on my show, no problem. And by the way, I just booked right now a woman, Rachel Fulton Brown, who is a professor of medieval studies at University of Chicago, who's being now maligned because she is, discussing white literature in her medieval studies, but that's really bad because only Nazis would be covering guys like Shakespeare.
Right.
And she's fighting back against this, and she's getting clobbered.
Wow.
So who steps up? I step up to bring her on. Rick Mehta, another gentleman, was recently fired from Acadia University in Canada from a tenured position because he went against the indigenization curriculum, the idea that you have to indigenize the curriculum at universities. So, but I do it, and not because I'm courageous or so on. I do it because I genuinely cannot look at myself in the mirror. I can't put my head on the pillow at the end of the night if I feel that I could have helped truth and didn't.
Yeah,
and I think that's what people have to pursue. The highest, most laudable goal in life is not to make more money, not to have bigger boats, is to pursue the truth in the best way that you can. And to the extent that that's an important goal and more people follow it, we'll have a better society.
I'm actually welling up when you say this. Do you have are you tenured? Do you have tenure?
I am tenured.
So I'm
a chaired professor.
See, now the difference, like most Americans don't have tenure. Like, let's say I'm working at an insurance company, right? And I work at, like, let's pick anything, Liberty Mutual Insurance. And I speak up against grievance culture because I believe grievance culture is where the small cabal of the loudest voices are. And the thing is, let's say she tweets something or she writes something in a newsletter. Will she have a job tomorrow? She probably won't because HR will. She doesn't have tenure, and I think that's it. It is the problem is I don't know if you can depend on everybody to spend their capital, especially if they have kids and a mortgage.
I got you, but let me offer a retort. First of all, tenure is not the end all. There are many ways by which you could be punished in academia. Other than by losing your job. So, for example, I went up for another chaired professorship this year, and I didn't get it, and I could have bet my whole house and yours that I wasn't going to get it. There's been many other opportunities for me to move to more lucrative professorships that failed at the last minute because there were people who didn't want me there. So it's not as though you don't bear a cost once you have tenure. Tenure is not the cloak that protects you against cancer and diabetes, right?
Right.
Last year I had to walk into the university with security detail because there were 1,000 death threats against me. I had to file a report with the Montreal police. So it's not as though I don't bear. It's not as though all you have to say, but bruh, tenure, and suddenly there is no threat on me. So look, each of us have to modulate our risk given our idiosyncratic realities. But as you said perfectly correctly earlier, we all have to share the risk. And if we don't, we will lose the battle.
Yeah, I think that's going to be my book. I have to write a book within the next couple years, and I think I'm going to call it "Share the Risk." I shouldn't have said that though because it's such a good idea.
Well, by the way, there's someone who sort of not quite beat you to the punch, but there's a book by a good friend of mine, and he'll owe me now because I'm plugging his book on your show. Nassim Taleb, the Lebanese author, has a book called Skin in the Game, right? I mean, Skin in the Game basically argues that for a signal to have merit, you have to bear a cost, right? So by putting yourself out there on the firing squad, this is an honest signal of your commitment, right? Sending me a private email telling me that you support me while begging me to not reveal that you support me simply says that you're a castrato, right? So this is what we're talking about. Not only share the risk, but be willing to yourself be risky.
Right, exactly. And I even feel, I mean, I've been guilty of that. You know, I've been guilty of writing something privately and not publicly saying it, and I go and maybe because I always feel that the target on my back is so large that, you know, whenever I say anything on the Five or the GG show that can be misconstrued as something evil, there are at least 3 or 4 groups that come after me, and they publish. They'll take like a joke and they'll make it as serious that I meant it. So it's like I always go like, God, I wish I could really support this person from what's happening. But if the moment I do it, they're going to come for me and blah blah blah, and it's like it's not worth it. But I think it's time that, like, you know, that changes. And I talk to myself about it. It's like, you know, you got to stand up, you know, because if you don't, it's just going to get worse, I think.
Very well said, sir. Exactly right.
Well, I'm going to go read Skin in the Game, and that will probably keep me from writing my book, and then I'll have to come up with another idea. Hey,
there you go.
Dr. SAAD, the offer's always open for you to come and do the GG show when you're in New York.
Wonderful. I'd love to.
Yeah. Well, thank you for giving me all this time, and don't hide behind your desk.
Thank you so much, sir.
You got it. See you, Fran.
Cheers.